Hey guys, it's Dante and welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited to be back with another video, guys. And honestly, thank you so much for all the outpouring support in my last video. It was honestly not something that I was really expecting. To be completely honest, I was ready for a bunch of hate comments being like, you absolutely did this horribly, like, you have no idea what you're doing, and it was just really cool that you guys really liked my content and thought that the research I did, was justice in telling their story. Because honestly, that's the last thing I want to do is, make a video that doesn't explain the case to the full extent that it could have, and so it was really cool that you guys said that I did a pretty good job, so thank you so much for giving me that nice feedback. I just want to plug my cute little tumbler. I got this from TJ Maxx. It was like $8 and it puts me in the Christmas vibes, and I really love this thing, so I just want to show you guys. Also, we don't use plastic straws or water bottles in this house. I've tried my hardest to not use water bottles because, reduce, reuse, recycle, so this is what I've been using for the time being, and it's super nice. Okay. Now we're gonna get into the video. Okay guys, so every case that I choose for a specific reason. I know this is only my second case, but bear with me. So last case, I chose because I was curious about the Megan is Missing movie, and so I wanted to know, what is the case behind this. Now this case is actually a lot closer to home in the sense that I actually did live through this case, as it happened a few towns next to mine. So the case we're going to be talking about today is the Jennifer Dulos disappearance. So this disappearance happened in New Canaan, Connecticut, which is, pretty close. I've been to New Canaan a few times in my life, and it's just really eerie that something like this could happen in a small town right next to us. So let's just get into the case and you guys can tell me what you think. Okay, so all of my cases I like to start off by explaining the victims and kind of just describing their life and just who they were. Because I really do want to focus more on the victims than the, criminals in these cases and the murderers, because I feel like they get sensationalized so much in the media so often, and I feel like we really need to put a focus back onto the victims, and that's kind of what I want to do in my videos from now on, so hopefully I can do that. Jennifer Dulos was born on September 27th of 1968 in New York City, New York. Her parents were Gloria Ortenberg and Hilliard Farber. Jennifer went on to graduate from Brown University in 1990, which is a really impressive school, but not only that, she went to New York Tisch School of the Arts for her master's, which is also a really impressive school in and of itself. I mean, personally, Brown is a huge achievement. I mean, I think so at least. It's a really good school, and not only to get into Brown, but also NYU Tisch School of the Arts is a huge, incredible achievement for her. And after she graduated and got her master's, she did end up marrying a man named Fotus Dulos, and she decided to be a stay-at-home mom, but she did still write for a blog called thepatch.com, which is like a New Canaan local news type of website. So the second person that we're going to talk about in this case is her husband, Fotus Dulos. Fotus Dulos was born on August 6th of 1967 in Turkey. And then he grew up in Athens, Greece. So he was not from here originally. He grew up, internationally, but then he ended up coming here, I believe, in 1986, where he then decided to go to Brown University as well, which again is super impressive, a really good school. And when he graduated in 1989, he decided to get an MBA in Columbia, which is a business degree, and that's also really impressive. Columbia is also a really good school, so, kudos to them for being very intelligent individuals. So after he had gotten his MBA at Columbia, Fotis decided to move back to Athens, Greece, where he met a woman whose name was Hilary Vanessa Aldsma, and she was also a graduate of Brown University, which is how they met. The two then decided to get married and stayed happily married for 4 years until they amicably decided to split, which just means that they both decided the marriage wasn't right for them and they both wanted out. So from what I read, the divorce seemed to be pretty mutual. Neither one had bad blood. They were just kind of ready to get out of this relationship. And they ended up divorcing on July 12th of 2004. But something that is important to note is that Jennifer and Fotis, so keep in mind this is not his wife, decided to start emailing back and forth in the middle of his first marriage, and they kind of started a secret relationship without his then wife knowing. Now, I'm not sure if they, met up a few times during this and did anything. All I know is that there was definitely emails exchanged between the two, and there was some sort of relationship going on between them. So he did finalize his divorce with his then wife, Hilary Vanessa Aldama, on July 12th of 2004. And then, only a month after this divorce was finalized, he decided to marry Jennifer Dulos on August 28th of 2004. So before they had their kids, they decided that it would be a better idea to move away from where they were, and they decided to move to New Canaan, Connecticut, which is known as a very safe neighborhood. So New Canaan is a very small town. I've driven through it a few times. They have some stores, just kind of the local boutiques and whatnot, And the high school has only around 1,200 to 1,300 students, so obviously it's really, really small. And the town itself is pretty well off. It is in Fairfield County, which is known for having a really high net worth per individual person. After they decided to move to New Canaan, they wanted to have children, and so they ended up having 5 children. Now, I'm going to leave the story off there for a second, and we're going to fast forward a little bit to around 2015, 2016, when Jennifer Dulos decided that their marriage, in her eyes, had started to break down. She cited as one of her reasons why she wanted to kind of end the marriage was because she felt like Fotus was just kind of growing too independent from her, and she felt like in a relationship it's important to be dependent on each other, and she just felt like this wasn't happening. So she decided that it would be time for a divorce. So on June 20th of 2017, Jennifer Dulos had decided to officially and legally file for divorce. In one of the court documents, she wrote, "I know that filing for divorce and filing this motion will enrage him. I know he'll retaliate by trying to harm me in some way." So obviously this kind of gives us insight into who Fotus was, and it seems like he might have had a violent streak within him. And this was not something that many people knew. Looking in on the couple from the outside perspective, it seemed like this was the, perfect marriage. They both went to really good, I think they're Ivy League schools. I mean, either way, they're very impressive schools. They both had children living in a perfect area, both drove nice cars, had a nice house. I mean, they were living the cookie cutter image of perfection. So a lot of people were shocked to hear that not everything was perfect on the inside. In the divorce proceedings, she also believed that her husband was having an affair with a woman named Michelle Trunkus. Now, Michelle was one of Jennifer's co-workers or colleagues, and they had known each other in South America, where I believe she worked a little bit before she ended up marrying Fotus and, settling down. In some of the other divorce proceeding paperwork, she also wrote that she believed he would try to kidnap the children if he was not granted custody. So obviously, he was a man that wanted these kids, and he would stop at nothing to get them, from what it sounded like, which made her very nervous. When she was filing for divorce in 2017, she also filed for emergency physical custody of the children, which basically just means physical custody means that she gets to keep the children with her and they would live with her. However, they both of the parents will have legal custody of the children, so on paperwork they're both still the parents, however she would have them in her home. Although Jennifer had described some of the things that her husband had done, the courts, they didn't have a lot of evidence. I don't think there were ever any domestic violence charges filed against him, so it was just kind of hard for the courts to give her all of the physical custody when there really was no evidence to prove that he was a danger. So they were granted joint custody of the children. However, in January of 2018, Jennifer had refiled for emergency custody because she had noticed that Fotus was breaking some of the divorce court orders that were set forth for the children. And obviously now the courts had reason to believe that he wasn't following the rules, and so they granted her sole physical custody of the children. So obviously this really upset Fotus Dulos, and he was pretty angry. I mean, he loved his kids. He claimed he did. And, this made him very upset. He wanted to see them, he wanted to be around him, and now he would only have supervised visits. So that's kind of how things went for around a year, and we're going to fast forward until May 24th of 2019, so about a year and a half after she was granted custody of the children. Everything was pretty normal that day. It was a pretty average day for Jennifer. So earlier that day, she had to drop off her children, and then she would have to go to a few doctor's appointments in New York City that she had had. So a little before 8 o'clock, she had went to go to the New Canaan Country School to drop off her kids because they had school that morning, and she was to come home as she had a few appointments that she had to make in New York City. At around 8:05 a.m., Jennifer Dulos can be seen driving her Range Rover back to her home on one of the neighbor's security cameras, and that was the last that anyone had ever seen of Jennifer. So obviously she had not gone to these doctor's appointments, which she had in the afternoon, which were obviously, kind of cause for concern, but people skip doctor's appointments all the time. It happens. It's not the biggest deal. It's not good, but, they figured, maybe something came up and she couldn't come and she couldn't call out. So the doctor's appointments didn't say anything. However, when their nanny went to go pick up the kids from school and she came home, she noticed that Jennifer was still nowhere to be seen. And she obviously thought this was kind of strange, as she did know that she had a few appointments in New York, but she should have been back by now because it was, later in the afternoon. And so at around 7 o'clock, the nanny had noticed that Jennifer's car, the Range Rover, was still in the garage. Now, obviously this was huge cause for concern because how would she have gone if this was her car? She also noted that there is a black Suburban that is in the home, but it is very unlikely that Jennifer would ever have used that car, as it just wasn't her car, so why would she be driving it when the Range Rover was right there? So this is when she decided to file for a missing persons report, and so she called the police and explained the situation to them and wanted them to look into this and just see what was going on. So the police did come over to Jennifer's house a little after 7 p.m. of that day. Now, when the police came there, they obviously wanted to speak to the nanny just to see what was going on and to see if, you know, Jennifer was the type of person that might just, you know, leave everything behind and run away. And when they talked to the nanny, she said that this was completely out of character for Jennifer. She was not the type of person to just leave her children behind. She said that the children were Jennifer's world, and it is very unlikely that she would just leave everything behind. And also, missing the appointments was very out of character for her as well. So, when the detectives, you know, arrived at the house, they wanted to do a preliminary search just to see if anything was, you know, moved around, if there was any signs of a struggle or whatnot. So obviously one of the first places they checked out was the garage because this is where her car would have been. Maybe one of the last places she would have been before something would have happened to her. So when they went in the garage, they were horrified to discover blood splatter was on the walls, door of the garage, and on the floor, as well as some spray was on the side of her Range Rover. Now obviously, you know, there was a decent amount of blood and they were fairly nervous, so they decided that, you know, a physical assault must have occurred here and it must have been pretty serious to produce this much blood. So when they did some more searches of the house, they walked into the kitchen and they found more blood in the sink. Obviously the first thing they did was call a forensics team. So the next morning a forensics team came and they obviously taped out the entire area and they started to take samples of all the DNA. They took samples of the blood from the kitchen and samples of the blood from the garage and they sent that off to the lab to be tested. Something else they did the next day was they had to check all the security cameras in the area. New Canaan is a very affluent area. Most of the people, if not all of the houses, had security systems of some sort. So they went over to the neighbors who they noticed had a security system and they asked him, would you mind giving over your security tapes? And he of course obliged. I mean, this is a very small community. Everyone kind of looks out for each other, which is a really admirable trait of New Canaan. And so when they went through the footage, they noticed that around 10:25 a.m. they could see Jennifer's black Suburban leaving the house, except they couldn't see if Jennifer was the one driving or not. So this is obviously kind of weird. Now they had a car leaving Jennifer's home after, you know, there was an assault taking place, so something isn't adding up. Something else they obviously wanted to look into was Fotus and Michelle, as they knew that Fotus was the ex-husband in a messy, messy divorce. I mean, this was described as a very messy divorce by the families involved and, you know, them themselves. So when they went to go track down where Fotus and Michelle were the day that Jennifer had disappeared, they found security footage of them in their car, and they were in Hartford, Connecticut, which if you don't know where Hartford is, it's about an hour-ish away from New Canaan, so kind of far. And they had seen him taking garbage bags and throwing them in various dumpsters all over the city of Hartford. And this is obviously very suspect, so they decided to go and check out what was in these garbage bags. And when they opened the garbage bags, because they did track them down to the dumpsters because they had it on video, they found bloody clothes and they found bloody sponges mixed with like bleach chemicals on the sponges as well. So to them, this obviously, you know, ensued. Somebody was trying to get rid of evidence. So this was obviously making Fotus look not good at all, and they wanted to question him. So when they questioned him, obviously he denied anything, and he didn't really say, you know, what he was doing, and he tried to, you know, cover his tracks really well. So obviously they knew that they weren't going to get a lot out of him, so they focused on the investigation to see what they could find evidence-wise in the crime scenes. So the next thing that was kind of released in the case was that the DNA had come back. It did match Jennifer Dulos' blood, the blood in the garage. However, the blood in the kitchen was also a match to Fotus. So Fotus and Jennifer's blood were found in the kitchen. So this does place him at the crime scene. So they also did end up finding the black Suburban, which is parked near Waveney Park, which is a park in New Canaan, and they found it parked on the side of the road. So obviously, this is kind of weird. Why is the car just sitting there? It was very odd. Why was this abandoned car there? So something that I just wanted to add really quick into the case is that I've actually been to Waveney Park where the car was found, which is super eerie just because, you know, it's a park where people come to play and have fun, and it's just crazy to think that part of a crime could have occurred there, you know, and it's just, and it just really, like, is kind of one of my connections to the case that was, you know, kind of insane, and just really made me interested in this case, and, you know, another reason that I wanted to talk to you guys about it. So some other evidence that they had found in the dumpsters, because they were obviously combing through the rest of the dumpsters, is they had found a bicycle. And they didn't really think much of the bicycle. They were like, oh, this could be anybody's, whatever. But because it was found with the garbage bags, they kind of thought this was weird. So they decided to look more into it, and they kept it as evidence. When they were looking over some of the security footage, one of the detectives had noticed that there was a figure riding a bike towards Jennifer Dulos' house right before the time of the disappearance and alleged assault. So obviously this was, you know, cause for concern, and they believed, well, maybe this was Fotus. Maybe this is how he did it. He might have taken a bike in to kind of avoid suspicion because people might have noticed the car, and, you know, he wanted to draw as little attention as he could. And something else that was really important was that right in front of her house, bike prints were found. and these matched the bike that Fotus, would have thrown into the garbages. Obviously, a lot of details were stacking up against him, and it looked like he was the killer or abductor in this case. So while the police were trying to get evidence against Fotus, they were also conducting some searches. I believe they had canine units, divers, and helicopters, as there was at Waveney Park a giant pond that they wanted to check because maybe the body could have been in there, who knows. They also used, as I said, helicopters to try and find her body as they were trying to search through Waveney Park and all of New Canaan to see if they could find anything. Sadly, all of these searches led to nothing really being recovered, and they couldn't find a body. Something else that they did was they hung up a lot of missing posters, and I actually was in Norwalk, which is another town across from New Canaan, and while I was there I had seen, literally this was maybe half a year ago, so 6 months ago, I had seen one of her missing posters still there, and it just really was kind of eerie because, we rarely see missing posters, but it was just there. Right there, and it was just like, this case is so real and so close to home, and I want you guys to really understand, like, this is a really big deal to happen in an area like this. So something else that kind of disproved the runaway case, which is obviously something else they looked into, is they did subpoena the records from her credit card activity and her phone, and sadly no activity has been seen on them since May 24th of 2019, so it was very unlikely that she had run away, as she had no money and no way to contact anybody. So after the police had kind of gathered enough evidence in their opinion, it was around June 1st of 2019, so almost a week or just a week after the disappearance had occurred, Fotus and Michelle were arrested at a hotel they had been staying at with evidence tampering and hindering the prosecution. The children were then obviously moved to live with a relative in New York because they did not want him around the dad if the dad had potentially committed this crime. So Fotus then hired his attorney because he needed someone to defend him, and he pled not guilty along with Michelle to all of the charges. So they eventually were able to post bail, both of them, and they, went back to their house in Farmington and were just, living normal life until September of 2019, so a few months later, when they were re-arrested for charges as new evidence had come through. And so now they decided to re-question Michelle Trunkus, as they believed that she was hiding information and things were not adding up in her original statements to the police. So when they interviewed her, they started to ask her about this truck that they had found that Fotus had actually borrowed from one of his clients. And, at first Michelle wasn't saying anything, but then she did end up saying she believed that Jennifer's body had at one point been inside of that truck. And so now obviously the police decided that they needed a warrant as they needed to search this car, and so they got one and they went to go search the truck. However, they noticed it had been meticulously cleaned. They said it had been vacuumed, detailed, car washed, everything. I mean, this truck was literally completely flipped inside out to be cleaned. And so obviously this looks very suspect because why would this car have been detailed just a month after the disappearance of Jennifer? And so when they asked Michelle, she said, well, obviously all the evidence says because you showed me the picture of the blood in the door. It's because the body of Jennifer at some point was in there. So she had just admitted that she strongly did believe that Jennifer had been in the truck. So she was even starting to suspect that her boyfriend was in on this. When they got a warrant to search the truck, they also decided to search his Farmington home. And when they were there, they found 2 note cards, which had the dates May 24th to May 25th, and they had listed a bunch of activities. And when they asked Michelle, what is this? She basically said that it was a list of things to tell the police that they had done, and she admits that most of them were actually fabricated and just not true. And she says that Fotus had made this list so that they would both have alibis so that the police wouldn't have anything to hold them on. So, we're gonna go back to the truck for a second. So they actually did end up sending the truck to the forensics team because, they couldn't find any evidence at first. They wanted to make sure that nothing was there. So they looked even harder and they actually were able to extract some of Jennifer's DNA, which means she was at one point in that truck. So on October 4th, Fotus believed that these charges were ridiculous. He was like, why are you targeting me? My ex-wife just died. This is ridiculous. And he tried to seek for a dismissal of charges. However, the judge absolutely said no. He believed that, Fotus was in on this in some degree and the evidence was just too overwhelming to ignore. So on January 7th of 2020, the police had decided that it was finally time to charge Michelle and Fotus. Fotus was officially charged with capital murder and kidnapping, while his girlfriend was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, as I guess they didn't have enough evidence to prove that she was actually there doing the crimes. So after these charges were released, Jennifer's family was obviously, happy that somebody was finally taking responsibility for the crimes, but it doesn't bring back the fact that they really will never have closure, and they still don't have closure as they still have no idea where her body could be. And so they released this to the public. Although we are relieved that the wait for these charges is over, for us, there is no sense of closure. Nothing can bring Jennifer back. We miss her every day and will forever mourn her loss. So obviously they just really miss her. And from what it sounds like, she was just a ball of light in everyone's life. And, you know, to be taken so soon from the world, you know, from her children's lives, who were still very young, might I add, it's just really sad to think about. So on January 8th, his bail was set to $6 million, which he was then able to post, and they said that he was due back in court on February 28th of 2020. Michelle had also posted her bail a few days later, and she was set, I believe, to appear in court around August 6th of 2020. So now that Fotus was out on bail, he was actually set to have an emergency hearing on January 28th, 2020. I'm not really sure what the emergency hearing was for, just that, you know, it exists. And he did not show up to this emergency hearing. So obviously it's illegal. If you're on bail, you have to show up to court. So the police went to his house to try to figure out what had happened. And when they went to his house, they looked into his garage and they saw that his car was there. And they were like, well, that's weird. When they went in to get a better look, they saw that Fotus was laying unconscious inside of the car, and he was unresponsive as they were calling out his name. So when they opened the garage, because they knew that they had to get in because he did not look to be well, they saw that he had attached a like vacuum pipe thing, you know what I'm talking about, the air ghoster or whatever, from his exhaust pipe and put it inside of his car. And this is a very common thing that people do to commit suicide, unfortunately. What they do is they turn on their car, leave it on, shut the garage door, and take a vacuum hose and they put it on the car exhaust pipe and they lead it into their car so the carbon monoxide is released into the car. So yeah, that's, you know, how it kills you. And so they obviously found him and they were, you know, they didn't want him to die because they still needed him to go to court and answer to his crimes. And so they tried to perform CPR on him, which actually was successful. And the police were actually able to restore a faint heartbeat to him, and then they then sent him to the hospital to have his injuries further assessed and to have him, you know, seek more help. However, on January 30th of 2020, there was just too much damage done to his body. At a certain point, if you don't have air going to your brain for a long enough period of time, you are unable to be helped. You just go brain dead and you can't really do anything to save the individual. So he was pronounced dead. When they went back into the garage to do a full search of the place, they found a note next to his body which read, "I refuse to spend even an hour more in jail for something I had nothing, in all caps, to do with." So obviously, even in death, he was trying to maintain his innocence. And just a few months after this, in May 2020, Michelle finally came out to the public. I guess maybe she wasn't afraid because he was dead now. And she said it was a complete mistake to trust Fotus Dulos. And she does claim that she truly has no idea what happened, but she does hope that Jennifer is okay, or at least they do find and get closure on whatever happened to Jennifer. So guys, that is where the case will be let off for today. There's not really much more information I can give you, which is really sad, as now the family really has no way to get closure. Still, no one knows where Jennifer's body is, and no one knows, you know, what really happened to her in her final moments. The cops kind of have an idea of what they believe happened, which I'll go into right now. Basically, a synopsis kind of what they believe happened is Fotus had taken a bike to Jennifer's house, and after she had dropped off her kids, he was in the garage lying wait. He attacked her in the garage, killed her, and then, you know, tried to clean up the scene, which is why he had bloody clothes and bleach and blood on the sponge. He tried to clean everything up and at some point transferred Jennifer's body into the truck, where he then took her, you know, and moved the body who knows where. He then took the garbage bags that had all the bleach and blood on the sponges, and he took all of his blood-stained clothes, and he tried to get rid of them by, you know, he took his girlfriend, he was like, "Can you run an errand with me?" And he dumped them all over Hartford. Actually despise the ending of the video, so I'm gonna end it here really quickly. Guys, thank you so much again for watching my channel. I really hope you enjoyed this video. One thing I do want to comment though is if you are actually a native of Fairfield County, or you know anyone who lives here, or maybe were here during May 24th to May 25th when Jennifer's disappearance had occurred, please do not be shy. If you saw anything, maybe with Fotus or anything that you believe to be suspect, you have the power to make a difference in this case. And I mean, any case, you know, if you've seen something, don't be afraid to go to the police. So I'm going to leave the number right here for the New Canaan Police Department. If you do think that you've seen anything, please let them know. They are actively still trying to find this body. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, just to spread more awareness about her case and that, you know, the body still was never found. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm sorry this ending is really ratchet, but it had to happen. Yeah, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Deuces.